Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I'm your teacher, Professor Nasir Iqbal, and today I have come up with the most important topic of Aristotle's book, The Poetics. Last week, you remember, we discussed imitation, the concept of imitation as interpreted by Aristotle, though he has borrowed the term from Plato from his The Republic. Tragedy. Today our topic is Aristotle's concept of tragedy. And tragedy, as says by Aristotle, is the superior form of poetry, is the best form of poetry. And as you all know, I have told you in the background of my lecture, in the background to Aristotle's Poetics, that the main object and the main mission of Aristotle while writing the Poetics is to defend poetry and to rebut the charges leveled against poetry by his master Plato in his famous book, The Republic. And as I said, that tragedy is the most important form of poetry. So let me say that if you ask my point of view, I tell you that tragedy is the only subject in the poetics. All the other subjects, the concept of imitation or plot or unity of action or unity of time and unity of place, and the difference between epic and tragedy and tragic hero and amartia and catharsis, are all inclusive in this single concept of tragedy. I tell you that I will explain each of these topics that I have just mentioned individually as well for your better understanding. But I tell you that all these topics are included in a single concept, tragedy. So that's why on this ground I said that tragedy is the only subject dealt with in the Poetics by Aristotle. Since imitation is within the tragedy, as he begins his concept of tragedy is that tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious and also having magnitude, complete in itself, in language with playable accessories, and the incidents of fear and pity wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. I have spoken before you the definition of Aristotle of tragedy given in the Poetics in Greek language, which was translated by a famous philologist Ingram by Water. If you remember or if you memorize this definition of tragedy, which I have written for you on this paper and have underlined certain words, you can explain the whole concept of tragedy, in fact, the whole Poetics. First, you look at this definition translated by Ingram by Water from Aristotle's The Poetics. Poetics, as you know, has been written in Greek language, and this is the translation of Aristotle's concept of tragedy. If you memorize this concept of tragedy, then it becomes damn easy for you to keep discussing its various components. This definition is all inclusive. It includes plot, it includes tragic hero, it includes everything. All the six components of or constituent elements of tragedy. That's why I'm showing it very closely for you to write it down. But before I begin with Aristotelian concept of tragedy, let me have a word about Greek concept of tragedy. So tragedy is a word that has been coined from the Greek word tragedai. Tragedai means a male goat. In Greek festivals, tragedies were held on 4 consecutive days, and the characters who participated in tragedies wore the dress of the skin of goats. Goats means bakri. And the first 3 days were presented the serious plays, whereas on the fourth day, a satire plays with the spellings SATYR, satire plays were shown. In satire is a sort of burlesque with burlesque characters. On some day I will explain what is burlesque, how we use the term burlesque, and what is the importance of burlesque and burlesque characters. But today I spare it and confine myself to tragedy. Later on, in Greek days, tragedy was considered to be a serious drama, whereas in the Middle Ages later on, and in the Elizabethan days or in Renaissance days, the concept of tragedy was a drama that ended on an unhappy note. However, coming back, as I said, on Aristotle's concept of tragedy as is written on this page and as I have expressed it before you, if you memorize it, the first sentence that is written on it is, tragedy is the imitation of an action. It means tragedy is a superior form of poetry, which is the imitation of something original, imitation of an idea, and imitation of the action. And you have seen that action has been underlined by me. So tragedy is the imitation of the action. And what does the word action means? Action is the movement of one thing from another thing, or the doing of something or another thing. And action, is related to human beings. One human being performs one action and the other human being performs another action. This is what we call action and reaction. And this action and reaction of human beings are in fact called events. Right? So action is an event. Action here means tragedy is the imitation of an action. First you understand this thing. This is a single sentence. Tragedy. What is tragedy? Tragedy is the imitation of an action. It means tragedy is the imitation of one event or more than one events. Now, events, if you combine so many events logically and with great sequence, keeping in mind the proper order of those events, as you know, one event takes place before another event, and the other event takes after another event, or takes before another event. So it happens number one event, number two event, number three event, number four event. For example, event number one is that I knocked the door of my friend. This is event number one, automatically. And event number two is my friend opened the door for me. This is event number two. And event number three, according to the logical sequence of the events, is that he hugged me warmly. This must be event number three. And event number four is that he opened his drawing room and made me seated on a comfortable place. This is event number four. And event number five is that he served me a hot cup of tea. This is event number five. And then we started chatting. This is event number six. And event number seven is that after having company with my friend, sometimes say half an hour or an hour, I took leave of him. This is the next event, and I departed. And the last event is that I reached home. Right? This is the proper sequence of events. Now you cannot do it like this wise that he hugged me and later on I knocked his door, or he served me a cup of tea standing in the street. It means you have disturbed the sequence, logical sequence, intellectual sequence of the events. So, combination of different events is called action, and this combination of different events in a logical sequence is called a plot of a tragedy, or even I say of a novel, which is a later form, quite centuries later form. But it is called plot. If you collect so many events and arrange those events in proper order in a sequence, it becomes the plot. It means that this first sentence, tragedy is imitation of an action, is that tragedy is the imitation of certain events pertaining to human beings on the stage. It further means that tragedy is the imitation of a plot, because the combination of so many events involving so many human beings, or at least two human beings, is called a plot. So that is why on this ground Aristotle is of the view that plot is the most important component of tragedy. In fact, he goes to the extent of saying that plot is the soul of tragedy. Character holds the second place, and later on we will come to this topic. This is a tricky topic, and the difference between the character and the dramatic personages. Most of the students believe that these dramatic personages, or the people taking part in a drama, are called characters. This is not the case. The character is something quite different. The character shows their attitude, the behavior, the idiosyncrasy of the different character or different dramatic personages. So the complete attitude, my behavior, my say experience with the students for the last 27 years explains my character. So character means a combination of so many events of so many years makes the complete character of an individual taking part in a drama called dramatic personages. They are not called characters. On this ground, Aristotle says plot is the soul of tragedy, character holds the second place, and he goes to the extent of saying that there may be a tragedy, there may be a tragedy without characters, but there may not be a tragedy without plot. So, this was our first point, that the tragedy is the imitation of an action. And the next point, as it is written before you, is an adjective clause, that is serious. So the action that is serious, so means grammatically action is the antecedent of that is serious, means the action or the plot of tragedy is quite serious. Now in Greek days, as I mentioned earlier in my intro, it was not necessary that all the tragedies come to an unhappy ending. Though factually and actually all the tragedies come to an unhappy ending, but it was not necessary, as Aristotle has cited the example of Oedipus Rex time and again in the Poetics. And as we have gone through certain other Greek plays, Greek tragedies, and they come to an end on a tragic note, on an unhappy ending, where either the separation, a painful separation takes place, as in the case of Oedipus Rex, between Oedipus, the king, and his daughters, and he blinds himself. So nothing is more painful to see a man who has blinded himself and who has separated himself from his own daughter. So this is an unhappy ending. But just for the sake of saying that this is not necessary, Aristotle says that the theme and the dialogue of the dramatic personages and their character must at least be serious in nature. They should not be burlesque like comedy. And this is the main difference, and as it was explained in the object of imitation, that the object of imitation is to depict man in action, right? So the man in action may be depicted in tragedy as higher than the normal, because in tragedy we have to come across with so many hardships, with so many difficult, where a protagonist has to take some very difficult decisions, as Oedipus Rex has taken some very difficult decision. If there had been a common man like me in the shoes of Oedipus Rex, I would have taken quite a different decision, because I am not made of the clay with which Oedipus Rex is made of. So he is a perfect dramatic personage for a tragedy, because he can afford, his sinews are greater, his psychological strength is greater than the psychological strength of the common individual. That is why he took a great decision. So the action or the plot of tragedy needs to be serious. It may or it may not come to an unhappy ending. And our next point is that the tragedy must have a certain magnitude. Now I ask, if this video has gone a bit lengthy, I stop it here on the concept of magnitude, and I record it from the same place the next week. What do we mean by the magnitude, or what does Aristotle mean by the magnitude of the tragedy? What is meant by magnitude? I thank you very much.